About a year and a half ago, I made a video looking at the Ultimate Warrior's forgotten years of 1993 and 1995. He had some pretty interesting stops in those years. Ever since, I've been racking my brain and looking for a good wrestler to follow that up with. Most guys, if they're not on American TV, are just kicking around various indies. Not really interesting. Then I spotted it. Jake the Snake Roberts' time in Mexico's AAA promotion. Jake's talked a bit about it, but it doesn't get much chatter online, and certainly nothing on wrestling YouTube. Hey everybody, it's Scott doing the edit, and I just wanted to interrupt the video for a second here right at the start to mention this before it was too late. But I did come across this Jake the Snake Roberts in Mexico video by Superkick Lucha Libre. It is in Spanish, and if you're a Spanish speaker, I really encourage you to go check it out. I guess the more accurate thing to say is that this is the first video on wrestling YouTube about Jake Roberts in AAA that's in English. So back to the video. So I figured I might as well highlight this overlooked run of one of the best of all time. This is the story of Jake Roberts in 1993 and 1994, in his time south of the border. Jake the Snake Roberts. We all know his life story by this point. The son of a wrestler, Roberts broke into pro wrestling at a young age, and by the mid-80s was considered by many one of the best in the business. He was a master of in-ring psychology and had a captivating presence on the microphone. But Jake also fell into wrestling's dark side. He used drugs and alcohol to cope with a rough childhood, the bumps and bruises of the business, and the loneliness of the road. Jake's demons and short fuse would contribute to him making rash decisions like demanding his WWF release prior to WrestleMania 8 over not being added to the creative team after being told he may have a spot. Jake showed up in WCW in August of '92, but a management shakeup resulting in Kip Frye being replaced by Bill Watts led to the Snake departing WCW by November. So what was Jake to do now? Well, he hit the independent scene obviously, but he also had a very interesting offer come his way. In early 1993, Conan called Jake to discuss Roberts coming to AAA to work a program with him. Conan at this time was a megastar in Mexico. Thankfully, his time as Max Moon in the WWF didn't last long and didn't really affect his drawing power in Mexico. The people loved him. Jake had never worked Mexico before, which was surprising to me. But the money sounded right and it was something different, so the Snake accepted the offer. Jake debuted at Triple Mania 1 in April 1993 during the main event 2 out of 3 Falls career versus career match, pitting Cien Caras against Conan. Roberts spent the majority of the match at ringside being a nuisance to Conan. K-Dog would win the first fall, but later on Cien Caras would even it up. The two went back and forth with the advantage, and that's when Jake had enough. He berated Caras for not finishing Conan off. Then Roberts attacked Conan's second, Mascarita Sagrada. That's when the fans had enough. The moment Jake lays a hand on Mascarita, they go nuts. No one was safe from Jake's wrath here. When Jake brawls with Cien Caras, he's not selling Jake's worked punches. So Jake gets him in real close and gives him a stiff one. And Caras goes up for the body slam nice and easy after that. Jake and Conan then brawl around ringside and into the crowd. As they're brawling, the fans are realizing that the referee's count is past 10, and getting close to 20. Cien Caras is back in the ring. Conan is still concerning himself with Jake. He's got to get back in the ring! Ding, ding. It's over. Cien Caras had won the match and saved his career. Conan had to retire. The crowd of 48,000, the largest in lucha history at the time, expressed seemingly every emotion there is. Some were in stunned silence. Some were angry. Some were even in tears. Jake had no idea how big wrestling was in Mexico, or how big a star Conan was, or how serious the fans treated wrestling. But he'd done his job. He'd made the fans want to see Conan get revenge. Jake got so much heat after the first night that 5,000 fans waited outside the heel locker room until 3 a.m. when the police were finally able to get the crowd to disperse. So he drank tequila with Perro Aguayo until the crowd was gone. Roberts was supposed to return to AAA for a follow-up in the feud in June. But the problem was that he hadn't even been paid for his Triple Mania appearance yet. So Jake no-showed. AAA promoter Antonio Pena told Jake that he'd get paid when he came back to Mexico for the June events. But that didn't sound feasible to Jake. In July, it's announced that a New York businessman had launched a new promotion, the International Wrestling Council, which would act as an offshoot of AAA and help break the promotion into America. For a young company like AAA at the time, this was a huge opportunity. They needed to keep building off of the massive reaction from the ending of Triple Mania. They needed Jake the Snake back. So, AAA sent Jake almost double what he was expecting. He agreed to continue working for the promotion as long as he got paid up front from now on. It was a deal. Jake returned to AAA to make his in-ring debut in August 1993 for their show at the LA Sports Arena, the same venue that hosted WrestleMania 7 just a couple years earlier. Jake didn't think the show would draw well, but they packed in over 17,000 fans, allegedly turning away between 8,000 to 10,000 people at the gate. This was a massive house for a newer company from Mexico to attract in the US, even in a heavily Hispanic area like Los Angeles. A huge accomplishment for AAA. Jake's first match was a three-way elimination match versus Cien Caras and Konnan. Yeah, K-Dog didn't follow the stipulation from Triple Mania and vowed to get revenge on Jake and Cien Caras. The match gets out of hand on multiple occasions. Jake even gets his hands on Mascarita Sagrada again. All of the seconds get involved, including Jake's, which included Eddie Guerrero and Diamond Dallas Page. DDP would make several appearances with Roberts in AAA and was an excellent addition to his presentation. According to Jake, AAA wanted to book him as a big monster heel, swatting away the high flyers and no-selling, instead of his usual conniving, outsmarting heel. But thankfully, Jake didn't really follow that plan, but he does do more no-selling than I've seen from him prior to this stint. Konnan would get the win via DQ after Roberts hit him with a low blow. With all the craziness happening, it was a simple low blow that caused the disqualification. Jake wasn't a fan of the lucha style or how AAA booked with all the interference and wild brawling that came along with it. But you know who did like the booking here? The crowd. They were going crazy, throwing shit at Jake and DDP. Beer bottles, food, batteries, stuff is constantly coming at them. This just got wilder when Roberts brought out his Cobra. He was chasing back fans with it, taunting the audience to come get him. Jake had them in the palm of his hand. Roberts and DDP had to fight their way back to the locker room area, and Jake ripped into Pena for putting him in that position by not having any security. The following night in San Diego, Jake teamed with Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr to defeat Octagon, Cien Caras, and Konnan. After the bout, Roberts went on a tirade in the locker room. Jake wasn't happy with how Guerrero and Barr were bumping. Roberts felt like they needed to bump more if he's going to be some no-selling monster. After some orders from Pena, the team bumped around like ping-pong balls. Jake teamed an awful lot in six-man tags with Barr and Guerrero. And Jake used the opportunity to take the youngest Guerrero under his wing. Jake had worked with all of Eddie's brothers and knew there was something special about him. After these appearances, Jake takes a tour with New Japan in September 1993. I know I'm focusing on his AAA run, but I do want to briefly include this tour, because there's some very interesting matchups. For instance, he wrestled friggin' Kojima and Hashimoto. He teamed with Dean Malenko to take on El Samurai and Tatsumi Fujinami, and as a send-off, his last appearance was teaming with Brutus Beefcake to take on Scott Norton and Hercules? What? The Snake and AAA returned to the LA Sports Arena in November 1993 with another big crowd of about 12,000 people to see the main event of Roberts, Barr, and Guerrero versus Konnan, Perro Aguayo, and Blue Panther. The heels would get the win with Jake pinning Konnan twice. The second time was only a visual pin as the actual fall was won by Art Barr pinning Perro Aguayo. Just as the last time, the heels raised hell post-match with Jake tormenting fans and wrestlers with his Cobra. For the next couple of weeks, Jake would join the tour in Mexico. This is when the culture shock of how different Lucha Libre was really set in. Again, Jake wasn't aware of how serious fans treated wrestling in Mexico. He had so much heat he could barely walk around these towns that they worked in, because he'd get cornered by fans that wanted to kick his ass. As much as the Snake liked to party, unfortunately that wasn't going to happen south of the border. He also wasn't prepared for how corrupt some of the local authorities were down there. According to Roberts, there was a bus ride where they were stopped by the cops, supposedly for having drugs on the bus. The cops found nothing but demanded the fine be paid anyway before they could drive on. So, Antonio Pena paid the fine and they were on their way. Later in November, though, Jake would be paired up with an old friend, Sherry Martel. The duo would show up to the Cien Caras vs. Konnan IWC Heavyweight Championship match, sitting ringside. And of course, they would get involved and cost Konnan yet another match against Caras. Afterward, the crowd was so hot you could see Roberts and Sherry shoving their way through fans to get to the locker room area. They had to fight their way back. Jake was thrilled to be able to work with Sherry since they had always been close, especially as a couple of kids getting started in the business. A couple of nights after Sherry debuted, she made her first managerial appearance with Jake, accompanying him ringside as he partnered with Art Barr, aka Love Machine, against Konnan and Blue Panther. Once again, Jake would outsmart K-Dog and get the win. The next big moment in the Roberts-Konnan feud would come in March 1994. AAA back at the Sports Arena drew a crowd of 13,000, which was not far behind that year's Royal Rumble, but because the AAA show had a more expensive ticket, their gate actually beat out the WWF, with 228,000 in ticket sales. Those 13,000 fans saw the main event of Jake the Snake Roberts vs. Konnan in a steel cage. The match had tons of heat and tons of extracurricular activity going on. This is the type of chaotic wrestling I love when done right. But Jake was not a fan of all the gaga that went on. He felt they could get the fans to the same level of excitement with just their match. Mascarita Sagrada got a measure of revenge, hitting Jake with a splash from the top of the cage. Roberts didn't sell the splash because it was obvious that Sagrada didn't exactly land on Jake. And in the Snake's own words,
"If I act like I'm fucking dead, they're gonna say you're a phony fuck. I'm not doing it."
Konnan would finally get the win over the Snake, but their story was far from over. Jake's next stop in Mexico in May 1994 saw the most obvious but craziest thing happen. His Snake turned on him. On night 2 of Triple Mania 2, after a loss in a 6-man tag, according to Roberts, his Snake wrapped itself around his neck and started squeezing and squeezing until Jake was unconscious. Lots of AAA staff came out and helped pry the reptile off Jake. Holy shit. And apparently it wasn't the first time this had happened. It happened sometime in '86 when he was working with Steamboat. Crazy that it hadn't happened more often. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, the TV version of the match doesn't show this post-match event. But you can see Jake constantly laying across the Snake, so I can understand how it happened so easily. Thankfully, Jake was able to make it to night 3 of Triple Mania 2 for his next main event against Konnan, a hair versus hair match. Being an old school guy, Roberts was fully on board with the idea. He had no problem having his head shaved, for a price. That price? Around 25 grand. And with his prior pay disagreements with AAA, Jake was not going to take any chances on getting stiffed while he's bald. So he made a deal. Pena would give him half up front, and give the remaining amount to his representative when they arrived in Tijuana. That representative would be none other than Scotty Riggs from the American Males. Wrestling is so weird. Jake gets all his money and has a fantastic match with Konnan. Roberts brings Love Machine and the Warlord with him. He brings some American flags. Konnan is the valiant babyface that overcomes the odds and finally topples the heel once and for all. Members of the roster come out to hold Roberts down, and some even stomp on the bag with the Cobra. A cathartic moment for the fans as this chapter comes to an end. Worst part for Jake was probably the actual head shaving. He'd bladed and he was a sweaty mess, so that didn't help the Clippers at all. They were tugging and ripping the hair out, must have really sucked. Also, this is a constant complaint in hair matches. I feel like wrestlers don't know how to use hair clippers. So if you ever wondered why Jake shows up in Smoky Mountain Wrestling in June of '94 with a hat and do-rag, there's your explanation. Jake continued to work AAA dates throughout the summer, still teaming with Guerrero and Barr, mostly in the US, including main eventing their show at the Paramount Theater inside Madison Square Garden. His final AAA appearance for this run came in August of 1994, when he teamed with his arch-nemesis Konnan to defeat Perro Aguayo and Vampiro, a fitting conclusion to his time in AAA. Roberts would wrestle a couple more independent dates at the end of 1994 before announcing his retirement in March 1995. This retirement was part of Jake's dedication to getting and staying sober after becoming a born-again Christian. Of course, his retirement wouldn't last long, as Jake would return to the WWF in 1996. He'd return to AAA in 1997 and team with Fake Razor and Fake Diesel, but it didn't come close to a stint in 1993 and 1994. While Jake did have some fun moments, overall he doesn't look back at his AAA run fondly. He never felt safe traveling through the country or even getting back to the locker room. There was the obvious lack of trust due to the money issues, and the style they worked and the way they booked wasn't something Jake was particularly a fan of. But from a fan perspective, this is such an entertaining run to watch. Jake Roberts, arguably one of, if not the best heel ever, just absolutely relishing the role. Being the biggest heel he can be to try and make the hero that much bigger. The matches aren't really going to blow your mind in terms of moves, but the way Jake sells, the way Konnan and other babyfaces fire up, the way the crowd reacts, it all really makes for a fun experience watching it. And thankfully, a user named Taylor Mainberg has already compiled these matches into a YouTube playlist. So go check it out, I highly recommend it all. And if you want some more AAA action, be sure to visit Roy Lucier's AAA YouTube channel. It's packed with full episodes of AAA TV. I'm Scott from WrestleSpective. I hope my Spanish pronunciation wasn't too abysmal. Watch wrestling, love wrestling, thanks for watching.